Hello, Michigan music lovers. This is Scott Baker, musician, music journalist, and producer, welcoming you to the Michigan Music History Podcast, covering all the territories of the Mitten. We cast from around the block of the brand new Michigan Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Bay City, Michigan, in the heart of the Great Lakes Bay region. And I'm joined by Michigan music royalty, sitting to the left and right, Dr. J. Gary Johnson of the Michigan Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and MichiganRockandRollLegends.com website, and Sir Fred Reif, Michigan music author, publisher, manager, and musician. Together they have taught, lectured, traveled, hosted, and have been quoted worldwide on all things Michigan music. Chances are you stood next to them at the record store or shoulder to shoulder at concerts over the years. They are the record crate diggers and the library microfishermen that have dug around for the details, the credits, and the lineage that has been part of the backstory of Michigan music. So grab your favorite beverage, hit the cruise, and take a trip back with us as we open up a can of earworms on Michigan's rich music history.
Welcome to the Michigan Music History Podcast Show, channeling through all styles and eras of Michigan music, from before you were born up through this very minute. And now, your host, Scott Baker.
Hey, everybody. Back here at the beautiful Studio 163 in Essexville, Michigan. Going to be an evening of talk about one detailed item, and that's a really popular record label out of our state that was around for a little while that Fred Reif had a huge hand in, and that's Schoolkids Records out of Ann Arbor. And once again, I am joined by Fred. Dr. J is on vacation, and he will be back here in a few weeks, but we, in the meantime, we're going to get caught up on the details behind Schoolkids Records in Ann Arbor, 523 East Liberty Street. It was next to the Michigan Theater, just west of State Street. And they were synonymous for a lot of styles of music, a lot of artists from all around, not just Michigan artists. And all I know is Fred was the hub and the mastermind back behind the desk that had to answer the phones and do all the detail work. He did everything except for what?
Pay the bills, sign the artists, the things like that.
A lot of jobs.
But it was always a lot of fun. It was actually, as it looked back on my life, best job I ever had.
Was it?
I loved it.
Now, what years were you at Schoolkids Records?
Well, I originally moved to Ann Arbor in 1991 to work at Tower Records. And I was a manager and buyer for a number of departments. But they weren't paying very well, and living in Ann Arbor gets a little expensive. So I decided I was going to send a resume to Steve Bergman, the owner of Schoolkids Records, the record shop. And I did. And the very next day, I get a call from him saying, could you come in for an interview? So I went and had to go in front of the board. There were about 4 people on the board. And I guess I passed. So I only worked at Tower about 4, 5, 6 months. And I didn't start there until September of 91.
In Ann Arbor.
Right. So then it had to be the early part of 92 that I started working at Schoolkids. And I was working the floors, in the actual record shop at the beginning. But I told Steve Bergman, the owner, that my interest, because he was starting the record label, and he already had Mr. B, Mark Braun, local piano player, very popular person down there. And I think that Dick Siegel was already out, folk singer-songwriter from Ann Arbor. I think those two were already out by the time I got there. So the next release was another local. We're trying to get, it was a local label, so we were trying to get the more popular local acts. Mm-hmm. So the third release was by George Bedard and the Kingpins.
Okay.
And then want to look at my list here. Oh, yeah. Steve Bergman was friends with a guy out in West Virginia who had a connection to Steve Ferguson from NRBQ, the band. So he talked Steve Bergman into recording. There's so many Steves in here. I got to keep saying their last names. But his buddy talked him into putting out Steve Ferguson album. It is a great album. Let's see, I don't have it here. Oh, Jack Salmon and Derby Sauce, Steve Ferguson and the Midwest Creole Ensemble.
And Steve is from NRBQ?
Right.
Oh, wow.
The original.
The original one, yeah.
Guitar player. And he and I become pretty good friends while he was on School Kids, and a couple times I booked him in the area. One of the times it was for a benefit for the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Fest. And somehow I got to book the entertainment, and so we got Steve on that, Ferguson, and it was, the audience just loved him, and he sort of became an Ann Arborite because, he just felt so at home. And then we did re-release the 2 albums by the King Bees.
Well, and were they on a different label at the time? Or those the two
Yeah,
albums?
they were on, I think, a major label.
Okay. So you got the rights to them.
Right.
Bergman purchased the rights.
Whatever.
That was his deal.
That was his deal. I was just promoting the stuff and marketing it. But then we ended up, after we did released those 2 as one CD, Steve met Jamie James, who was the lead singer and the main guy behind the King Bees, and decided to put out an album by him. So Jamie James wanted nothing but the best, so Steve hired Johnny Banachek, Johnny B, and Mark Goujon, who was the bass player in I think the original Mitch Ryder, and paid them, some bucks to be on the session. And we also had Scott Morgan and George Bedard. I think he appeared on it.
Wow.
It was a pretty good, unfortunately, it was one of our worst selling CDs.
Really?
And Steve Bergman, I think he, put a little more money into this release because he hired a couple session guys. I don't think it really helped the sales. But, and then we were getting into Scott Morgan. And he approached Steve. See, a lot of these, Steve Bergman leased them from the artist or from whoever.
Oh, okay.
I'll get to the ones that we actually recorded. And so Scott, he was very well known in the area. And so whatever deal he worked out with Steve Bergman, we released the first Scott's Pirates album. And eventually we released another one way down about a couple years later. Then from there, we put out, it was all kinds of music. We put out the Deadbeat Society, which was a very popular local bluegrass band. And they were really good. I really enjoyed that. I was in a bluegrass band back in 1970. But since then, I kind of moved away from the music, but the Deadbeat Society were a pretty hot young band, and I really enjoyed seeing them. And then we were moving in. Oh, I talked Steve Bergman into, well, he would have eventually got to it, but Steve Nardella.
Oh, yeah.
Who, with George Bedard and Mr. B, they're like the 3, they all were in, well, Mr. B and George Bedard were in Steve's band. early, before all of this. So I was the executive producer of the Nardella album, and so I was there for all the sessions, which we did at Brownsville Station's drummer, Henry Weck.
Oh, yeah?
He had a studio called Schoolhouse.
Really? Was that in Ann Arbor, too?
Just outside.
Okay.
On Valley Road. It was the actual schoolhouse.
Really? I remember seeing a press release on that back in the day or something, or read it in Goldmine magazine. But how did you become involved as the producer of that record? Like, they just put trust in you and gave you the ball to row and you ran with it, or how did that happen?
I'm not really sure. I don't even, while I was there, I was just there. I didn't really, that's what it says on the CD, executive producer Fred Reif, but, I wasn't actually in the studio producing anything.
Were you the guy that kind of got Steve involved with?
Kind of got it all together and did the liner notes and put the whole package together.
So he felt, Bergman thought you were the guy to do it then.
Right.
Okay.
So then from there, one night, this was when I was still living in my first apartment in Ann Arbor, and this guy calls me up by the name of Steven Springer. And he was from Trinidad, living in Ann Arbor. And he was a guitar player who played with Trinidad Tripoli Steel Band. So he called me up and said, "Hey, I want to be on your label." And I went, "Oh, okay. Who are you?" And I don't know, we just hit it off on the telephone. And I gave him my address, and within 30 minutes, he was over.
Really?
So he talked me into talking to Steve Bergman about getting his album re-released, because he already had it out, or, had the recording. I don't know if it was actually out yet. And Trinidad Tripoli Steel Band. So this was 1994, and I went to Trinidad and Tobago with Hugh Board, who was the head of Trinidad Tripoli Steel Band. And while we were gone, I was there for 10 days. And when he and I came back, they already were in the studio, Schoolhouse studio. And so when we came back, Hugh just basically had to put his parts on it, which was 2 steel drums. And most of the recording was already finished by the time we got back. And as it turns out, it's the only time I ever sang on a record.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it was about midnight, and there was a song called Bob and Peter. It's all about Bob Marley and Peter Tosh. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the song, or in the chorus, Emil Board was kind of that, taking care of the arrangements for that. I think it was him or Reno. And they said, "Okay, I want all you guys, we're going to sing this," like the Bob Marley thing. "Oh, yo, 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 yo." Mm-hmm. And so my voice is in there. I can't make it out, but
it's part of the chorus in there.
It's in there.
Oh, cool. What a great story.
And so we put out the Trinidad Tripoli, Steve Springer, and then Stephen got a hold of 2 or 3 other Caribbean bands, also Trinidad Tripoli, and little offshoots from that, Night Flight. And then there was a band from Cleveland that he got, and we put out 2 compilations of reggae and calypso.
What I got to ask you before you dive into that, now this is in the early 90s when alternative music was huge and the boy bands were coming out on the pop scene. Why did Bergman take this moment to go so deep into other worlds, just to have that niche? Or was it, what was the brainchild behind that, knowing that it wasn't popular at the time? Not that it matters, but
Well, in Ann Arbor, the Trinidad Tripoli band were one of the most popular bands at the time.
So it was a local thing on that,
right.
on that behalf.
I mean,
Okay.
they'd be lined up at Rick's Cafe to see the band, and they were local.
Okay.
And so we did the 2 compilations. They're not in a row. I don't have them in a row here. But then we did a blues band, a white blues band called Big Dave and the Ultrasonics. And they were pretty popular in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
But they are also a touring act.
Oh. So somebody that took the show on the road that you guys could actually put some promotion into.
Because most of our artists didn't really do a lot of touring. Trinidad Tripoli, Big Dave and the Ultrasonics. And those are the ones that we sold the most because they were out there and I could call up radio stations or make sure the distributor had them in the stores wherever they were playing. That was my job.
Yeah.
And
There's a PR man behind the
right.
label.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed talking to one of the guys I talked to at our distributor out in California. Was originally in Big Brother and the Holding Company.
Who was that? Not Sam Andrews. Not
Say no other one.
Peter, the bass player.
I think it's Peter.
Yeah, because I remember, I've actually talked to all those guys before.
Oh, okay.
I'm wondering. Peter had a lot of his foothold in helping out new bands out there, so that might be him. He's the bass player.
Okay. Because he worked at City Hall Records at the time. And so I always loved talking to him on the phone. And then we did a lot of jazz. We did the, local bands, the Lunar Octet. We did James DePogny and his orchestra. We did Winston Walls and Jack McDuff.
Wow,
Brother
champion.
Jack McDuff.
Oh, brother Jack McDuff. Okay.
And we had Pistol Pete on drums from the Funk Brothers.
Yeah.
And we recorded it live one night in Detroit, I think, and the other night it was at the Ark.
Really?
When Jack McDuff came. And that was a lot of fun. Winston Walls, his father was like, I can't think of his first name, but he was like the piano session man for Atlantic Records.
Really?
Even though Winston was kind of old himself, but...
Now, were you responsible for bringing stuff into town?
No. Okay. This was another Steve Bergman connection with his buddy out in West Virginia. And he knew Winston Walls, and so Michael Lipton is his buddy, who's also the guitar player in the Mountain Stage Band, that syndicated radio show.
Yeah.
So he talked Steve into putting out the Winston Walls. I forgot to mention the Cub Coda.
Of course, Brownsville station man himself.
He is a character, man.
I was going to get around to asking you about that one because I remember getting serviced that back in my college days.
Right.
Abba Gabba or something, whatever that one is.
Yeah, Abba Dabba Dabba.
Yeah, and that's a cool record. What a unique record.
Well, the first song on here, Random Drug Testing, Dr. Demento picked that up.
Oh, yeah.
And did it on his show. Yep. And, every song on here he did, is really good. But Cub, he'd come over to the office sometimes, and he had buttons all over Cub Power and
promoting himself.
Cubster. Yeah,
cool.
They were everywhere.
He's the man.
And he and I were competing for doing liner notes for different labels. He did the first reissue of a Lightning Slim CD, and I thought, wait a minute. How did he get him? I'm his manager, or was his manager. Mm-hmm. So I end up doing the next 2 or 3. But Cub and I were competing a few times for who's going to be doing the liner notes.
Right now.
Sometimes he won. I think he's actually a better writer, but
You both have your niche in the whole game there.
But then we did a series of, the original Essex recordings of Bill Haley and the Comets.
Really?
From 1951 to 54.
I don't recall that one.
Steve Bergman leased a lot of this from Johnny Powers.
He was in?
The rockabilly guy I was telling you last week about.
Yeah.
And we also put out a CD by him. And also a extended play one with him and George Clinton.
Wow.
Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Yeah, you touched on that one last week, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And we got these through Johnny Powers. These are all 50s rock and rollers. Sid King and the Five Strings. Big Al Downing, who I got to meet in England a few years later. I was there with Lazy Lester at a rock and roll festival. And Big Al was on it. And he's a piano player, and he's a lot like Fats Domino.
Wow.
And then we did a Charlie Gracie live. And these, before us, they were on Roller Coaster Records in England.
Wow. Dang. That's cool.
But, and then, we put out, like I said, some jazz albums and Lunar Octet, Charged Particles.
Now, who were they?
They were local.
Local? Okay.
Who already had this, the recordings done, and Steve would give them a number and, a school kid's number, and so we'd hold that number. And once they're ready to, if they got it out or already had it recorded, then, we'd give them that number.
Right.
And a lot of these groups, like I said, Lunar Octet and that, they were local and really not known too far out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Michael Johnston knew of these bands because they were kind of in that groove.
Right, right.
But let's see. Oh, then we put out another thing. This was through John Sinclair, who we also put a CD out with an orchestra. The John Sinclair and Ed Moss with the Society Jazz Orchestra. And we also was going to put out a video. I have a copy of it, but then we sort of went out of business.
Wow.
Never happened. But we put out 4 volumes of the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Fest that we leased it through John Sinclair. And the first volume was actually the show that I was the co-producer of back in 73.
Really?
It was the Detroit Review. And then the next one was a little Sonny, who was also from Detroit, harmonica player. And then we put one out with Roosevelt Sykes and Victoria Spivey. And another one, I think Big Walter. I think that was it. But we were eventually going to put out many volumes, including Sun Ra.
Oh, yeah.
That was kind of Steve Bergman's, one of his personal favorite, but we never got to it.
Huh. Interesting to find what they were heading towards before. What year did you come to an end there?
Well, I got laid off in 1997, so it kind of ended there. But I did Google last night to see. I wanted to make sure, because I thought I was there for all the releases. And I don't know if these ever came out, but there was another one by a local sax player by the name of Paul Vornhagen. 1266, I think the number was. And I know that didn't come out while I was there, so it might have just... Because pretty much the label ended in 97.
And what year did they start? Not just the label, but the whole business.
Well, Steve Bergman started the record shop, which was, for a number of years, an Esquire magazine voted in the top 10 of record shops.
I remember that was a big deal, yeah.
And it was a great shop. So he started about the same time that I started my store in Bay City, around 75.
Okay. And that was your first store, was the 75, but you had worked before that in Saginaw?
Yep, at the Record Hut.
The Record Hut. And then you opened your
Downtown
own.
Saginaw.
Okay, then you came to Bay City and opened yours, and what was yours called?
Black Kettle Records.
Black Kettle Records.
And we had a recording studio in the basement.
Yeah.
So, I was kind of little of aware of being in a studio and all that. So when I got this gig at School Kids, seemed like I just fell right into it, and I loved it.
Perfect.
And so in 97, pretty much the label went out, and Steve kept a record store going for about another year in the same location at 523 East Liberty, but that became like 3 or 4 storefronts.
Really?
Well,
That's huge.
Tower had moved into town, like I worked there at the beginning, and across the street from us was Borders, and they had a big record CD department. So Steve kept expanding the store, and it looked really good. I mean, it was a great store.
Maybe you can submit some photos to our webpage or to our Facebook page on this. Yeah.
And then I know how it is that you don't want to close your store or go out of business. So Steve started School Kids in Exile. And he was in the basement of like a outdoor type of store. I forget what it was called. He was down the basement there, and then he moved into the Nichols Arcade, a little spot in there. Then I guess he was just trying to sell off his stock.
I think I went to the Exile one. It was in that basement. It was around the block from there.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I remember going there a couple times before shows in Ann Arbor.
It was still a pretty good store. But
yeah. It had a lot of really cool different things. It wasn't just your popular top 10 Billboard thing. I liked it because you could dig through the archives there.
Right. Yeah, when I worked at School Kids or in the record store business, all the stores went by the Billboard charts. Mm-hmm. And when I ended my record store career, I didn't know how I was going to live without seeing a billboard.
Right.
I mean, I looked at it from cover to cover, every article, all the charts, and that's what you went by. Mm-hmm. And but like anything, it just faded away. So
I got the name Big Brother there, Peter Albin.
That's it.
That was him.
I think that was it.
Yeah. And some more Cub Coda stories. You, I think one of the first things you and I talked about in December when I come over, something about Cub. You had something to tell me. And did you release more than just that one CD by?
No, just that one.
All right, because I know you guys had the little writing thing. Because that was I cracked up at that being a writer myself. But
he was also part of at Christmas time. Him and Bill Kirchner, or Kitch. Anyways, the guitar player that was in Commander Cody.
Yeah.
And George Bedard and Sarah Brown, who's the bass player, who was in the original with Steve Nardella and George and the Boogie Brothers at the time, and Johnny Nicholas. And she came up, and so for about 3 or 4 years in a row, they did this it wasn't a guitar battle, it was just 3 guitar players playing, kind of different styles. Except Bill and George were kind of both rockabilly, but and Cub was
garage rock,
whatever he did.
Yeah,
but Cub, he did an album not for School Kids, and I think this was before he did this one for us. He got Hound Dog Taylor's band.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
To record with them.
Oh, wow.
And I loved listening to his stories.
Mm-hmm.
His Brownsville station stories, and he was very well known in the music biz.
Yeah,
and for writers and that.
I'm surprised that
he did a lot of liner notes.
I'm surprised
articles.
that Brownsville Station archives or live footage or anything didn't get shuffled through school kids at that point. Was Bergman trying for him, or you just don't even know?
I have no idea.
Oh wow!
I don't know if Cub
would have even cared to
if
do
he
it.
was trying to promote it. I don't really remember that. But like I said, we redid a lot of our recording sessions at his old drummer's studio,
right?
Henry Weck, and that was a really nice schoolhouse way out in the country, and all the ladies. I think he had bought the equipment from what's that recording studio in Detroit that they wanted to tear down the building, United.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I think he bought the board from there, so it was a huge board. And I was in the control room a lot, and I'm not really into. I like to play and play live and all that. So all the control room, I know a lot of musicians and that go crazy over all the dials, but I'm back there and I'm just lost.
You're like, get me on the other side next to that microphone. Yeah. I'm a lot better there.
But like I said, we did a lot of things with John Sinclair and Johnny Powers. And
you have a background with Sinclair, some of those shows, and I know Sinclair had some poetry stuff come out. I remember interviewing him at one point. He was actually, our interview time was set up, and this would have been just after college, so it might have been for the Daily, but I remember calling him at the time I was supposed to do it. I got him on his cell phone, and he was in a drive-thru getting a burger at Burger King at the time, and he did the whole interview, eating, and after that, getting down the road. He was leaving Ann Arbor that day, and he says, "Oh, no, Scott, keep talking." He was a hoot.
Oh, yeah, I love John. His laugh, it just comes right from the heart, man.
When did you first meet him?
Well, when in 1973 for the Ann Arbor Blues Festival.
The one you put on?
Right.
Okay.
He had the idea of putting on this show, and so I was the manager of most of them. So then they contacted me, and I went down for a meeting, and that's how I met John.
Fantastic.
And then I didn't see him for a number of years, but when I got involved with Schoolkids, he remembered my name, and I was just ooh. And so ever since then, we've been pretty good friends.
Do you guys still stay in contact?
Not as much. He's back living in Detroit again. And
Was he?
His health isn't the best, but do
you guys email, or do you guys just talk on the phone, or?
Well, if we do, it's just email or message.
Yeah. Lately,
anyways, because I'm not sure where he's living. When I was at a meeting at Third Man Records one time, the guy there said, "Oh, John just lives right around the corner."
Oh, really? So he's right around there. Okay.
In that area on Cass Street or somewhere.
Yeah, he's in the corridor then.
Right.
Okay.
But for years he was staying in Amsterdam.
Yeah. I know he was heading back to Amsterdam the day I called him or talked to him about years ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember what we were promoting at the time, but I had to do an interview. So he may have been coming up to White's to do a poetry slam thing or something.
Yeah, he did it a couple times, I think.
Yeah, that might have been it. Like they wanted me to cover that, and he was a heck of a guy to talk to. But he, did you guys you utilized any more of his stuff, his performance on Schoolkids at all?
Well, I think we would have if it
would have kept going. Okay.
If it had kept going. Like I said, he, the owner of the, as far as I know, of the Ann Arbor Blues Fest tapes. And there are also films would love to see that.
No.
There's occasionally you'll see something on YouTube, like the Hound Dog Taylor one, but...
Is this stuff still sitting in the archives somewhere of somebody's archives and never been released, never been picked up by a small label and put out?
Yep.
I'll be damned.
Well, after we went out of business, a label, let's see, High Energy or something out in California, re-released the Ann Arbor Blues Festival ones.
They picked up on that one.
Yeah.
You said you did 3 volumes of it, or 3 years of it?
4.
So you did 73, 74, 75, 76?
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
No, just
volumes
just
of...
volumes of certain artists.
So
which could have been the 73 festival or 72, mostly those 2 years. Because the 70s, 69 and 70 Blues Fest, John Sinclair wasn't involved in.
Okay.
That was more of a university sponsored.
Was that one of the first ones, or?
Well, they call it the granddaddy of all blues festivals.
Okay.
The 69 one. And I was at the 70 one, and that was the same weekend as Goose Lake.
No. Jeez.
The same weekend.
What a hammer time down South Michigan.
No kidding, but the Ann Arbor Blues Festival still had over, I think they said over 10,000. I mean, it looked a lot more, but...
Well, you got the blues down there, the original blues stuff going on, or you got the modern day, rockers going on the other side. So,
well, almost every blues guy that was still alive was at that festival.
Oh, wow. And is that tape? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
I don't even think there's any films of it.
Dang.
And one of my big memories of that festival was the guitar battle of Johnny Winter and Luther Allison.
Wow.
And I was just over on the side of the stage and watching this, and Johnny Winter went on first. Well, they're both up there, but he soloed first, and he was up there, and from where I was, it looked like a chicken with his head cut off. I mean, he was, just going wild.
Searing it up, yeah.
And Luther's just looking at him going, mm-hmm. And then it was time, Johnny Winter goes, point to him, and it's his time. And so Luther just goes right up the neck of the guitar. And just went wild. And Johnny Winter basically at the end of that solo unplugged his guitar.
No.
So that means
over.
Who won?
That's a great story. That was official podcast air guitar coming from Fred there too.
Yeah.
For those of you that didn't get to see that, that was wonderful.
I always wanted to be an air guitar player.
We've heard your other Luther story from when he played in the Thumb.
Oh yeah. Well, that was
mind.
Luther was very, very popular, and so was Johnny Winter. I mean, nothing against Johnny; he played well, but Luther just won that one.
Yeah, different kind of oil, that's for sure. Man,
well, every blues guy that was still alive was at the 70 festival.
Far out, man. Now, what blues artists, is there any that you didn't mention earlier that got picked up by school kids? Because I know that was your love, was not just the local scene, but the blues, period.
Well, no, not really. Oh, yes, we did. Loaded Dice, who was Lazy Lester's backup band that I got from Providence, Rhode Island. And they were from 1987 to 1990. We did 2 tours of Scandinavian countries for 5 weeks each. So they had a CD out, and I talked Steve Bergman into putting it in on our label, so we gave him a number, and so that was really the only...
It sounds to me like Bergman got all these CDs. He didn't have to pay to get them recorded. They were already done, and he just had to foot the bill to get it printed, right?
Or
For
whatever, whatever deal he worked out.
Yeah, well, that's not bad. I mean, that's a That's kind of what's happening now. Is a lot of labels are buying up artists that just can record at home, get it done, and you get this real minor budget for your recording. And the major part is just getting into the label itself and getting the distribution, if there is any.
Yeah, we also put out 2 or 3 classical type
Really?
CDs.
Talk about all over the map.
The Grail Singers, which was the woman who is the head of that, or whatever her deal was. She lived in Ann Arbor, and she already had the CD done, so Steve just leased it from her. And we did a couple other ones. Oh, another band I like to talk about is Kiss Me Screaming.
Who was that?
They were kind of like a punk band.
Okay.
New wave band.
All right.
And I can't say his name. Kylie Haddafi or something.
Where were they out of?
Ann Arbor.
Really?
And his
Cool.
sister was like the lead singer.
Too cool.
And they were pretty popular. They had a record out before, I think, on a semi-major label.
Wow.
And they already had this done, so we just leased it from them.
That's something to look up.
And another one was, I don't know how this happened, but Ezra Mohawk.
Huh. I no
clue?
No.
She was from California, and she was she said she was even on a Frank Zappa album.
Okay. Wow.
So she was kind of well known and been around for a long time, but
What did she do?
a singer.
Just a singer. Okay.
She was pretty good. We put out, what's it called? Rain Dance.
Okay.
It was a pretty good CD. Didn't do that well, but
Well, they had such a.
it was up for a Grammy.
Was
But
it?
I learned about what you have to do. You have to send the label around 50 CDs to the judges.
The label has to send around 50 CDs a piece for everything they want nominated.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she had us do that with this one. And, it didn't get very far, but that's a lot
Still.
that's a lot of CDs you have to.
Yeah.
And I was a judge because of my job at Schoolkids. I became a Grammy judge for Zydeco and
Really?
Cajun music that one year, in the 90s. And so I got about 30 different Zydeco and Cajun CDs.
Really?
And to listen to them all.
That must have been a trip.
Well, at the time, that was some of my favorite music,
Excellent.
especially the Zydeco. And I forgot who won that year, but,
You
I
heard
still
some good
have
music.
all those CDs.
You heard some good music.
Yeah.
My recollection of Schoolkids that, and probably our first talk on the phone, maybe even, and I know I didn't do an interview, but I probably did a promo on it in college, was Scott's Pirates. So I recognized
That second one?
the one with the foot on the
Right. Revolutionary.
Yeah, revolutionary one. Yep. And Scotty Morgan. I mean, that name is pretty synonymous with Detroit rock and Rationals and all that.
Definitely.
And you said Scotty you got to know him pretty well through that label, right?
He'd be up in my office almost every day.
Really? He lived right by you then,
Well, he lived in Ann Arbor. I don't know where he lived, but
right?
he would come up almost every day seeing how sales were. And, it was my job. Sometimes we'd hire a promotion person who would call up DJs
And when you couldn't do it all,
but then I decided, I said, Steve Bergman, we could save a little money. I mean, I know these guys. I know, because I was involved in the blues. I knew a lot of the DJs and a lot of the public radio stations and blah, blah, blah. So, I could do that. So then I kind of, except for a couple of the bigger acts, we wanted to really get it out there. But like, you know, we'd call up, or I'd call up a DJ, a blues DJ. Well, he had a show once a week, you know, a blues show on the radio station.
Yeah.
And you're only going to get played once or twice.
Right.
You know, because they want something different since they only do a show once a week.
Yeah, it's still a lot like that. I mean,
right.
Periodic blues shows.
So when I'd get the, you know, I'm going, well, we're getting airplay there, airplay there, airplay there, airplay here. But it was just like one time. So, you know, I didn't want the artist to get disillusioned. Because, you know, but like Scott's Pirates, you know, we couldn't get that on rock stations.
That kind of rock was kind of hidden away, almost like you know, with the alternative scene being so big, and then the classic rockers were kind of buried at that point a little bit. So unless you were Neil Young, there wasn't much, or especially Detroit artists. I mean, because the scene went to Seattle. You know, it just disappeared from our area. But was there ever any talk of Rational's music or Scott's own, you know, Sonic Rendezvous? You know, anything going through you guys?
Boy, I thinking back at it, I wish there was, but I don't remember any talk. And I knew because I booked the Rationals up here in Bay City one time. It was like a reunion of the Bossmen, and they had the Rationals, and maybe not Counting the Change, but
Question Mark.
Counting the Colony.
Oh yeah,
maybe Question Mark. Yeah, I think Question Mark was there because I remember talking to Bobby now.
Butch Burden's band though, Counting the Colony.
Right, and I booked them for some pretty good money up here in Bay City. But then one of his bandmates, who I think's passed away since, complained to Scott that, no, we should be getting this amount of money, not this amount of money.
Bigger.
I don't want to say what the amount was, because it was kind of ridiculous.
Right.
So I think there might have been some in-band fighting that day. I don't know, or, you know, because they kind of, afterwards, Scott had, because he wanted to do some Rational gigs, but this other guy wanted too much money. And so Scott was kind of like held back, I think.
They put him off probably, so he said, go back to my regular band duties. And even though the reunion thing would have been cool, not all the band members helped make that happen.
And Scott's Pirates was basically Sonic's Rendezvous, minus Fred Sonic Smith, which was a big part of it. But
right. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that was what they had left, you know, at that point. I see that Sonic's Rendezvous, I remember they did get picked up on a small label for a live release, or was it just the 45 or something?
Well, I know there was a 45 out. I don't know if I know there was something, I don't know if it was a bootleg but live at the Second Chance or whatever the name of the bar was at that time.
Okay. I know there's some bootlegs out there, though, because I remember Gary had posted some stuff to I think live footage. Yeah, I think Patti Smith might have even sat in with them that particular night. So are you still in contact with Scott Morgan? No. No? I would if I spend more time down in Ann Arbor, but for the last couple of years, he's been having some health problems. I just come across a picture of him and I at George Bedard's, one of his birthday parties. Really? His wife put on for him, and it was kind of a surprise birthday party, and Scott and I were both there, and so we talked for a long time. I'll have to get you guys reunited. Maybe we get Scott on the show here, if he's up for it. Well, he would love to do it, but, you know, we're kind of far from there. And right. I don't know exactly what his health issues are at the moment. I know on Facebook there was still occasionally some GoFundMe things. Huh.
But then I think he was playing in a band from, maybe this was 10 years ago, or maybe a band out of Sweden, because he was going to Europe a few times. Now, there was one band called the Helicopters.
Yeah.
Was that them, or?
It could have been. The Helicopters I'm really familiar with. They were a punky kind of band out of overseas. He might have...
I think that's the name of the band that he got hooked up with.
Really? That's great. I didn't know he played with them.
I'm pretty sure it was them. But, yeah, the whole School Kids label thing, in 1997 is when, the computer uploads or downloads or whatever you call, I guess, uploading music. And that started to really come in, and CD sales were going down, and so
they got caught right there at the tail end of when the MP3 thing happened. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, it's hard to make your business, your CD business flourish when your sales are getting disappeared by. What was it at the time? The Napster. Remember the whole Napster thing? And all that?
Yeah. Couldn't think of that early one.
But at the same time, I mean, people look now, 20 years ago, a little bit. It's kind of a Michigan legendary thing, School Kids. And it was just as synonymous for its storefront as it was as a little crazy label that put out a lot of different things.
Well, for the Detroit Music Awards, we won Best Label like 3 or 4 years in a row.
Really?
I know I accepted it a couple times.
That's cool. So cool. So cool.
It was a lot of fun.
Do you still talk to Steve at all?
Bergman?
Yeah.
Message.
Oh, good.
And if I see him, we run into each other. I don't live in Ann Arbor anymore, so I don't really see him that much. But, if I see something on Facebook that I like that he's doing, I'll, write him or something, or vice versa.
That's cool.
Both he and his wife, they're still, even though at the time, I felt bad, but I knew, I just felt something was happening because sales were getting slower and the whole CD thing was going. So when he told me that the label was kind of going to end, I wasn't really shocked, and I end up getting unemployment for 26 weeks or whenever it was, and then I started. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I turned 50 in 1997, and I already worked for the best record shop, the best label in the area. What do I do now?
Yeah. What's next? What came next?
Fred's Caribbean Connection. I started a hot sauce distribution company. And I loved doing it. And I traveled. A lot of my accounts were in the Traverse City, Charlevoix, Boyne City area. And so every couple of weeks I'd take a trip up there and spend a couple of days. And I had a lot of accounts in the Detroit area. But, how long it takes a person to...
Yeah.
So there isn't a whole lot of money.
I remember seeing the Caribbean hot sauces, and it was at a hot sauce store in Royal Oak.
That was my buddy.
I was going to say, that place...
I sold to him.
I saw them all there, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
So you just totally rang a bell, because I frequented that store when I would be down there. Yes, yeah.
Well, do you know who his brother is?
I didn't know even who owned it at the time.
Oh, okay.
I just love hot sauce.
Well, he and I can't even think of his name right now, but he and I became kind of friends, and he took me over to his brother's restaurant, which was down the road in not Royal Oak, but what's the next town?
Ferndale.
Ferndale.
Yeah.
And he had a barbecue restaurant, but he was selling his salsa on the side. Well, now it's
at the Dave's?
Jack's.
Jack's, I mean, that's what I meant.
It's in
Dave's,
every store right now.
That's so good.
So he closed up his hot sauce store and started working for his brother. And now, I mean, I was at Costco the other day and they're in there.
Yeah, they're chips and their salsa.
Chips and the salsa.
Our fridge has always got that in there. That's some great salsa.
It is.
Yeah. Oh, what a crazy small world. From Schoolkids Records to the salsa and hot sauce world.
Well, then after that, I had to get kind of a real job. And so I got a job and retired from the University of Michigan.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, we're going to have to save some of those next stories for the next batch. But any other last minute thoughts on Schoolkids?
Well, it was a great label, and I was happy to work there.
And you were a huge part of it.
Some of those recordings now are, I see them on Discogs or eBay. And
yeah. Goldmine. All of them.
Goldmine.
Remember Ice Magazine?
Oh, yeah.
Ice was great, too.
I used to write for Goldmine, and I used to do auctions.
Let's say you and Cobb Coda both were in Goldmine, if I recall. My buddy Mick Brown up in the thumb, he'd get Goldmine, and I'd take his leftover when he'd get done reading them, and I'd read you guys' articles.
John Kinnick, he was the owner of that.
Yeah.
He lived in Wisconsin or Minnesota.
It's still around, right?
I'm not sure. I don't see it anymore.
I don't know if it's print. It might be online only, but Goldmine still pops up quite a bit on some cool.
Because I used to do, before eBay, I did auctions in there every issue.
Right. I remember that in the back part of that thing.
Right.
Full of auctions.
And it got bigger and bigger.
Wow.
And they'd have a big want list. People wanted records, so.
That is so cool. I remember that.
But I'm still in the record business today, except online.
Oh, plus, you have another big story coming up when you can talk about it here in the summer. So.
Yep. That took a little turn, but.
Well, you could tell me. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We are the Michigan Music History Podcast. I have, as you know, the great ones sitting next to me here, and I am lucky to be in the area where we're surrounded by them. So much great talk. Please send your contributions and ideas, pictures, video, and feedback to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. That's where we can be reached, and we have more stuff coming up soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in. Additionally, Dr. J can be reached at MichiganRock'n'RollLegends.com. Sir Fred can be hit up at FredReif.com. And Scott through ScottBakerMusic.com. You can also search Michigan Music History Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. You've been listening to the MMHP in the 989.